The streets of the capital were alive with color and sound. Yet beneath the festive lights, tension hung like a shadow. Lanterns swayed in the crisp evening air, casting uneven glows across cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Merchants shouted, children laughed, and nobles strutted with airs of importance, all oblivious to the whispers of power that lingered in the corners, whispers of a Lycan king who ruled from his cliffside fortress, a king whose name alone could silence a room. Ilara moved among the crowd, her posture careful, her eyes alert. She was known for her sharp mind and gentle heart, qualities that made her beloved by some and envied by others. Tonight she had hoped only to enjoy the festival in peace. But peace was a fragile thing, and jealousy was an even sharper edge. Her best friend, Mira, approached with a smile that did not reach her eyes. At first, Ilara thought it was a greeting, warm and familiar. But the moment Mira's hand struck her cheek, the world seemed to tilt. The sound of the slap echoed louder than the music, and the crowd fell into stunned silence. "What? Why?" Ilara gasped, holding her cheek, the sting spreading like fire. Mira's expression was unreadable, a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. "You always think too highly of yourself," she said, her voice low but carrying enough for all nearby to hear. "It's time someone reminded you of your place." Shame and confusion collided within Ilara. Faces turned toward her, some with pity, some with amusement. The noble ladies whispered behind their fans. The merchants shook their heads. It felt like the world itself had turned against her in a single heartbeat. But she did not have time to respond. From the edge of the square, a ripple of movement drew her gaze. A tall figure descended from the shadowed steps of a pavilion, and the air seemed to grow colder with each step. Even the lanterns flickered, as if in fear. Kalen, the Lycan king. His presence was magnetic and terrifying, a force that demanded attention. His hair, dark as midnight, fell in waves around his shoulders, and his eyes, golden and luminous, seemed to pierce straight through the crowd. No one dared speak, and even Mira seemed to shrink back, her bravado faltering. Kalen stopped in front of Ilara, his gaze locking on her as though he could see every hidden thought, every buried fear. He did not speak at first. He merely looked, and the sensation of being seen in such an unyielding way made her heart hammer against her ribs. Then, with a movement both deliberate and chilling, he raised his hand. A glow emerged from the tips of his fingers, pale and shimmering, and it touched her wrist. Pain lanced through her skin, sharp and deep, but not cruel, more like a fire that burned away the fear she had carried for so long. The mark appeared glowing faintly as if alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The crowd gasped. Some whispered of curses, others dared not speak at all. The Lycan king had marked her. You don't understand," Ilara stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't—" Kalen's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd, low and commanding. "You belong to me," he said, each word precise, carrying weight and inevitability. "Whether you wish it or not, the mark binds your fate to mine." Mira's face paled. What have you done?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Ilara felt a strange pull, not of her choosing, drawing her toward him. Fear and awe warred within her. She had heard stories of the Lycan king, of his power, his ruthlessness, and the curse that had kept him isolated for decades. To be marked by him was to step into a world she did not yet understand, a world where she would be watched, tested, and bound by magic older than the kingdom itself. "Please, I don't belong to you," she tried again, pulling her arm back, but the mark flared as if reminding her that defiance was a futile exercise. Kalen's gaze softened, just enough for her to feel the faintest hint of something unexpected. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps sorrow. "This is not punishment, nor is it gift," he said. "It is destiny. And yet, your spirit will choose how you face it." The crowd murmured, fear and fascination mingling in the air. Whispers spread quickly. "The Lycan king has chosen a mate. The cursed king has marked her." Ilara's mind raced. How could this be? She had always tried to live quietly, to avoid drawing attention. And yet, here she was, bound by a supernatural force she barely understood, marked in front of the very kingdom she had always called home. Mira stepped forward, her voice shaking. He cannot do this," she exclaimed. But Kalen's presence alone silenced her, the power radiating from him like a living shield. "Silence," Kalen commanded, and even the wind seemed to obey. The lanterns flickered, shadows lengthened, and for a moment, it felt as if the world itself held its breath. Ilara's thoughts were a storm. Betrayal, fear, humiliation, but also an odd thread of fascination. The Lycan king was terrifying, yes, but there was something in his eyes that hinted at loneliness, at pain, at a story untold. For reasons she could not name, she wanted to understand him, even as the mark throbbed with power and promise. The crowd slowly dispersed, unwilling or afraid to linger, leaving Ilara standing in the center of the square, marked and trembling. Mira's betrayal stung more sharply now, colored by the overwhelming presence of the Lycan king. She had been humiliated publicly, and yet it was the mark, the binding, that left her heart pounding with a strange, unbidden tension. Kalen stepped closer, the light of the lanterns glinting on the edges of his armor. "You will come with me," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "The night is long, and your fate will not wait." Ilara swallowed hard, the pulse of the mark echoing in her veins. She wanted to refuse, to run, to scream. But every instinct screamed that resistance was pointless. She nodded, barely, her voice lost in the sudden hush. As they moved toward the shadowed streets leading out of the square, Mira followed at a distance, her face pale and conflicted. Ilara caught her gaze for a brief moment, and in it, she saw both regret and fear. It was not the end of their friendship, at least not yet, but it was the end of innocence. The path to the Lycan king's fortress was winding and steep. The castle loomed above the city like a dark sentinel, its towers disappearing into clouds that swirled with an unnatural light. Wolves howled in the distance, a reminder of the power that awaited her. Every step closer made Ilara's heart beat faster, a drum echoing her fear, her uncertainty, and perhaps a whisper of a forbidden curiosity she could not name. Kalen remained silent beside her, yet she felt his presence like a tether. The mark on her wrist pulsed in response to his own heartbeat, a constant reminder that their fates were intertwined now, whether she accepted it or not. "Do you feel it?" he asked finally, his voice softer than before, though still commanding. "The bond? The connection that cannot be undone?" Ilara looked at her wrist, the glow steady and warm despite the chill in the night air. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to fight this destiny with every ounce of her being. And yet, a part of her trembled at the thought of understanding him, of stepping into the unknown that he represented. I feel it," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Kalen inclined his head, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Good. Fear is natural. Resistance is expected. But your courage, that is what will matter most in the nights to come." The first part of her journey had ended in public shame and supernatural marking. The next part, the path through fear, power, and something deeper she did not yet understand, was only beginning. Above them, the moon rose, casting a silver glow on the winding path to the fortress. It illuminated the mark on her wrist, faintly pulsing, a heartbeat in the night that mirrored her own. Somewhere in the shadows, wolves howled, and the wind carried a whisper. Fate has chosen you. Will you rise to meet it, or will you falter? Ilara's lips parted, a mixture of fear and awe. She did not yet know the answer, but deep inside, a spark had ignited, a spark that would not be easily extinguished. And Kalen, the feared Lycan king, walked beside her, silent and watchful, the weight of destiny pressing upon them both. The festival lights faded behind them, leaving only the path forward, and the unknown that awaited in the shadow of the castle. The castle of the Lycan king rose like a shadow against the night sky, jagged towers piercing the clouds, their edges glinting with silver moonlight. Fog clung to the cliffs, curling around the stone walls as if the fortress itself breathed with life. Every step Ilara took on the winding path felt heavier than the last, her heart pounding in rhythm with the pulsing mark on her wrist. Kalen walked beside her, silent, his presence a constant pressure against her senses. He was as dangerous as he was magnetic, a predator of legend, yet there was something human in the way his eyes occasionally softened when they flicked to her. She dared not trust it entirely. Fear was her shield, but curiosity, like a hidden flame, began to grow. The massive gates of the fortress opened without sound, revealing a great hall illuminated by pale, enchanted torches that burned without smoke. Shadows stretched along the stone walls, twisting as though alive. The air was thick with power, ancient and unyielding, and every step Ilara took echoed in the cavernous space. "You will stay here tonight," Kalen said finally, his voice low but firm. "The bond you bear is new and unstable. It must be tempered with understanding." Ilara tried to pull back, but the glow from the mark flared slightly, as if reminding her that resistance was futile. Her pulse raced, not just with fear, but with something unnameable, a tension that clung to her like the fog outside. "Understanding?" she asked cautiously. "Do you mean the bond?" He nodded, his golden eyes studying her as though weighing her soul. "It is more than a mark. It is a connection of destiny. It will pull at your heart and mind. You will feel emotions not entirely your own, and in turn, I will feel yours. To deny it is to invite pain. To embrace it is to face truth." Ilara swallowed hard. The thought of sharing even a fraction of her innermost feelings with this powerful, unpredictable king filled her with terror. And yet, a part of her longed to see him as he truly was, beyond the myths and the fear. You don't have to," she began. But he interrupted with a shake of his head. "I do not force, but I cannot ignore what is." His voice held no malice, only certainty, and she realized that the weight of his power extended beyond physical strength. It was a presence that commanded obedience, even from the heart. The night passed slowly. Ilara was given a room that overlooked the cliffs, the ocean waves crashing below in a rhythm that matched the pulse of the mark. She could not sleep, thoughts swirling around betrayal, fear, and the impossibility of the bond. Every now and then she felt it, a tug at her consciousness, a whisper of Kalen's presence threading through her mind. She turned toward the window, expecting to see him, but the room was empty. Morning came with a chill that seeped through the stone walls. She found Kalen waiting in the great hall, as though he had been there all night. His expression was unreadable, but the mark pulsed more strongly than ever. "Today, you will begin to understand," he said. "We will walk through the halls of the castle, and you will see what I have protected, what I have endured, and why the bond is necessary." Ilara followed him cautiously. The corridors were endless, lined with portraits of Lycan kings past. Their eyes seemed to watch her as she walked, and whispers of old curses seemed to drift from the walls. She realized that this was not just a fortress. It was a living memory, a repository of power and sorrow that Kaelin had inherited alone. They entered a chamber filled with artifacts, ancient weapons, enchanted relics, and scrolls that hummed faintly with magic. Kaelin picked up a delicate pendant, his fingers brushing over it lightly. "This belonged to my first fated mate," he said, voice tight. "She was taken from me before the bond could mature. The pain of that loss is why I cannot allow mistakes. And yet, the loneliness—" His voice faltered, and he set the pendant down. "I endure it daily." Ilara's chest tightened. For all his fearsome reputation, there was vulnerability here, a sorrow that mirrored something deep within her own heart. Betrayal by Mira, public humiliation, the sudden marking. They had all left scars, and here was a man centuries older than her, carrying a weight far heavier. I can't imagine," she whispered, unsure what to say. "You need not imagine," he replied. "You only need to observe and decide how you will face your own destiny." The day passed in a series of lessons, some of them physical, some mental. Kaelin showed her the training grounds where Lycan soldiers honed their skills, the library where ancient spells were recorded, and the council chamber where alliances and betrayals were debated. At each stop, she felt the tug of the mark, a reminder that she was no longer a bystander in this world. During a break in the lessons, Ilara wandered into the castle gardens, a strange beauty amidst the stone and shadow. Flowers glowed faintly under the enchanted light, and fountains whispered as though telling secrets to the night. Kaelin joined her quietly, his presence less commanding here, almost human. "You are afraid," he stated, not as accusation, but observation. I don't know what to feel," she admitted. "Humiliation, fear, something else I can't name." "That something else is natural," he said. "The bond awakens desires you may not understand, but it also awakens empathy. It forces truth, and truth is never easy." They stood together in silence, the wind carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. For a moment, Ilara felt a connection that was neither fear nor rebellion, but a quiet understanding. Perhaps it was too soon to trust, yet she could not deny the pull she felt toward him. The day ended with a sudden commotion. One of the castle sentries burst into the hall, pale and frantic. "My lord," he called. "A messenger from the capital. They speak of plots against you. Mira is involved." Ilara's stomach twisted. Mira? Her mind raced to the betrayal at the festival, now tied to the dangers that threatened Kaelin himself. I didn't know," she exclaimed, guilt and fear mingling in her voice. Kaelin's expression darkened, but the intensity of his golden eyes shifted, not toward anger, but calculation. "Show me the messenger," he commanded. The messenger, trembling, delivered letters sealed with the marks of nobles and merchants alike. Words of conspiracy, warnings, and threats unfolded before them. Mira's betrayal was part of a larger scheme, a political maneuver meant to weaken Kaelin's rule through scandal and fear. Ilara felt a pang of remorse and confusion. Her friend's actions had been manipulated, and yet the sting of the public slap remained, a reminder that trust was fragile. Kaelin looked at her, the mark between them glowing faintly. "Your involvement is not by choice, yet your courage will define your place in what is to come," he said. "You will have to decide, will you stand with me, or will fear rule your heart?" Ilara felt the weight of the words pressing into her. She wanted to run, to hide, to deny the bond entirely. And yet she also felt the strange draw of destiny, the pull of the mark, and the undeniable intensity of Kaelin's presence. That night the castle seemed alive with whispers and shadows. Ilara could hear the distant howls of wolves, the rustle of unseen creatures, and the faint hum of magic threading through the stone walls. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the mark casting a soft light across her skin. She thought of Mira, of betrayal and misunderstanding, and wondered if forgiveness was even possible. She thought of Kaelin, of power and vulnerability, and wondered if trust could grow where fear had ruled. And then, as the first light of dawn crept over the cliffs, she felt it again, the pull of the bond, stronger now, threading through her heartbeat, whispering of connection, danger, and a path she had not chosen but could not deny. Ilara rose from the bed, her eyes tracing the castle walls and the distant horizon. She realized something she had not admitted to herself. She was no longer merely a visitor in Kaelin's world. She was bound to it, marked by destiny, and the choices she made in the coming days would shape not only her fate, but that of the kingdom itself. At that moment, Kaelin appeared at her door. His expression was unreadable, yet there was a quiet invitation in his stance. "Come," he said. "The day will demand more than observation. It will demand courage, trust, and understanding of the bond that binds us." Ilara nodded slowly, feeling the mark thrum against her skin, as if alive and aware of her decision. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and shadowed by the sins of the past. And yet, for the first time, she felt a spark, a fragile, flickering light of resolve that perhaps she could face what was to come, with Kaelin by her side. And so, together, they stepped into the morning light, the castle corridors stretching before them like the threads of destiny, pulsing with the unspoken promise of connection, challenge, and the dark, beautiful tension that neither of them fully understood. Yet both could not resist. The fog hung thick over the cliffs as Ilara and Kaelin made their way through the castle gates. The city below was already waking, unaware of the threads of destiny weaving silently above. But the castle grounds were silent, almost too still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath in anticipation of what was to come. Kaelin led her to a courtyard that opened onto the edge of the forest. A cursed place, ancient and wild, where no light fully penetrated the canopy. Wolves roamed here freely, their eyes gleaming in the dim glow of early morning. The trees whispered secrets with the wind, and the ground was littered with roots that seemed to twist like living things beneath her feet. "This forest is old," Kaelin said, his voice low and steady. "Older than the kingdom, older than the first Lycan kings. It remembers everything, betrayal, love, and sorrow. If you are to understand the bond, you must first face what lies within." Ilara's heart tightened. The stories she had heard spoke of travelers who entered this forest and never returned. She tried to swallow her fear, but the mark on her wrist pulsed with a heat that made her flinch. It was no longer merely a sign of fate. It was a living tether, pulling her forward whether she wanted to follow or not. "Why here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why must I face this in a forest of shadows?" Kaelin's golden eyes softened. "Because your courage and your heart will be tested. Only there will you see the truth of the bond, and only there will you understand what it asks of you." They stepped into the forest together. Immediately the air grew thick, heavy with magic and the scent of damp earth. Shadows shifted in ways that seemed unnatural, and every rustle of leaves carried an undertone of movement, as if unseen creatures were observing them. Ilara's hand instinctively brushed against the mark, which pulsed more rapidly now, mirroring the rhythm of her heartbeat. For hours they walked in silence, the forest testing her with illusions. She saw visions of Kaelin, sometimes angry, sometimes gentle, sometimes alone and broken, and each vision tugged at her emotions. The line between reality and illusion blurred. She felt fear, longing, sorrow, and even a strange warmth that she could not explain. "You are struggling," Kaelin observed, appearing suddenly beside her, as if materializing from the shadows themselves. Do not resist the visions. They are meant to teach, not to harm. Elara took a shaky breath. It feels like... I can feel everything you feel. The anger, the loneliness, even the sorrow. How is this possible? The bond is more than a mark, Kaelin explained. It connects our hearts, our minds, even our spirits. You will feel my pain, my joy, my doubts, and in time, I will feel yours. It is not a curse, nor is it a gift. It is truth, and truth is never easy to bear. As they continued, the forest revealed another trial, a phantom of Kaelin's past mate, bound in sorrow and unable to move on. The ghostly figure mirrored Kaelin's pain and loss, her eyes reflecting centuries of loneliness. Elara gasped, the sight stirring both fear and compassion within her. Kaelin stepped forward, his presence commanding the apparition to step aside. Do not fear, he said softly, yet firmly. This is part of my history. It is pain I carry, but it is not your burden. It is yours only if you allow it to consume you. Elara nodded, trying to steady her trembling hands. She realized then that understanding Kaelin meant facing not only his power, but the depths of his sorrow. And in that moment, she began to see him not as a king or a predator, but as a being trapped by destiny, carrying burdens she could scarcely imagine. They walked deeper into the forest, the light dimming as they passed through ancient trees that towered like guardians. The mark pulsed stronger with each step, as though the forest itself acknowledged the growing connection between them. Suddenly, a howl echoed through the trees, and shadows leapt across the forest floor. Wolves emerged, eyes glinting, teeth bared, yet Kaelin did not move to fight. Instead, he stepped in front of Elara, his presence radiating an authority that the wolves could not challenge. The animals circled, growling, testing, and then slowly retreated into the shadows, acknowledging his dominance. Elara, Kaelin said, his voice carrying the faintest edge of warmth. Fear is natural, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is standing despite it. You are stronger than you realize, stronger than even I had expected. Ilara's chest tightened, a mixture of pride and apprehension. The words stirred something within her, a flicker of confidence that the mark seemed to amplify. She felt the bond not just as a pull of fate, but as a connection that demanded courage, honesty, and heart. Hours passed, and the forest began to thin, opening onto a clearing bathed in moonlight despite the early hour. In the center lay an ancient relic, a crystalline orb suspended above a pedestal, glowing faintly with a light that seemed almost alive. This is why we came, Kaelin said. The orb reveals the truth of what is to come. It shows what will happen if the bond is embraced, and what will happen if it is denied. Elara stepped forward, drawn by the orb's glow. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, visions flooded her mind, scenes of the kingdom in turmoil, shadows of betrayal, battles fought, and moments of deep connection between her and Kaelin. Each vision pulled at her emotions, making her feel joy, fear, sorrow, and hope all at once. She gasped, stepping back, overwhelmed. I don't understand it all. How can this be real? Kaelin placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. It is not for understanding, only for feeling. The bond cannot be fully explained. It can only be experienced. Elara looked up at him, meeting his golden eyes. For the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt trust, fragile but growing. The bond had shown her not just Kaelin's power and sorrow, but also his capacity for protection, loyalty, and perhaps even love. A sudden rustle in the clearing made them both turn. Shadows moved unnaturally, coalescing into a figure cloaked in darkness, an agent of those who had sought to manipulate Mira and undermine Kaelin. The figure lunged, and instinctively, Kaelin stepped in front of Alara. The bond flared, and she felt a surge of his strength flowing through her, steadying her, lending her courage she did not know she possessed. Together, they faced the threat. Kaelin's power was unmatched, but Alara discovered she could move with precision, guided by the bond, anticipating danger in a way that surprised even her. The figure fled into the shadows, leaving only whispers behind. Ilara's chest heaved with exertion and fear, yet she felt exhilarated. She had faced a danger alongside Kaelin, not as a bystander, but as a partner. The bond was no longer merely a tether. It was a connection that allowed her to stand beside him as an equal in courage and purpose. Kaelin studied her, his expression unreadable for a moment, and then softened. "You have done well," he said. "More than I expected. The bond strengthens not only with time but with trust. You are learning its power, and yours." Ilara's heart pounded, the mark glowing faintly on her wrist, pulsing in sync with her emotions. She realized that fear and attraction, courage and uncertainty, all mingled together in a way that was confusing, thrilling, and impossible to ignore. As they left the clearing, the forest seemed to settle around them, shadows retreating, the air lighter than before. They walked in silence, the connection between them unspoken but undeniable. "Ilara," Kaelin said quietly, "the trials are not over. What we face today is only the beginning. The bond will test you further, and the world will not be forgiving. You must decide. Will you embrace what is to come, or allow fear to guide your path?" Alara looked at the moonlit path ahead, at the cliffs, the castle, and the distant city. She thought of Mira, of betrayal and guilt. She thought of Kaelin, of power, sorrow, and the inexplicable draw she felt toward him. She felt the mark on her wrist, a heartbeat in the night, and made her choice. Not a choice of submission, nor of denial, but of courage. I will face it," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "I will face it. With you." Kaelin's eyes softened, a flicker of warmth crossing his features. "Good. The bond demands courage, and you have shown it today, but know this. The nights ahead will challenge you in ways you cannot yet imagine. You must be ready, not only for yourself, but for all that hangs in the balance." Alara nodded, the pull of the mark steady and strong. She felt the connection to Kaelin not as a burden, but as a guide, a thread that tied her courage and heart to something far greater than herself. The forest receded behind them, replaced by the looming walls of the castle. Wolves howled in the distance, shadows stretched and flickered, and the wind carried the faintest whispers of future trials. Ilara knew one thing for certain. She could no longer deny the bond, nor the connection that drew her to Kaelin. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with danger, and shadowed by the sins of the past. Yet for the first time, she felt a spark of strength and resolve, enough to face what was to come by his side. And as the castle gates closed behind them, Kaelin's hand brushed hers for the briefest instant, a silent acknowledgement, a promise unspoken, and the first thread of trust in a bond that would test the limits of heart, courage, and destiny. The dawn broke over the cliffs, pale light spilling across the castle like a soft promise. The trials of the forest had passed, yet the weight of destiny hung heavier now than ever. Ilara stood at the edge of the balcony, the wind tangling her hair, the mark on her wrist pulsing steadily, a heartbeat shared with Kaelin. He appeared beside her silently. As always, his presence grounding yet intimidating. The castle was quiet, the usual echoes of wolves and magic subdued for the moment, as if the world waited for what would come next. "You've grown stronger," Kaelin said, his voice softer than usual. "Not just in courage, but in understanding. The bond is not merely magic. It is trust, respect, and choice. You have begun to embrace it, and in doing so, You have begun to understand me." Ilara met his golden eyes, her own heart pounding in rhythm with the mark. It is not easy," she admitted. "There are times I am afraid, and there are times I do not understand. But I feel connected to you, not just because of the bond, but because of who you are and what you carry inside." Kalen's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, and a flicker of something tender appeared in his gaze. "That is all I have ever wanted," he murmured, "to be understood, not feared, to be seen, not just as a king or a legend, but as someone who has endured loneliness beyond measure." Ilara felt a surge of empathy, a rush of admiration, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun's light. For all his power, for all his legend and fearsome reputation, Kalen had carried centuries of isolation, pain, and betrayal. And yet, he stood beside her, offering her a chance to face destiny not alone, but together. Their moment was interrupted by a sharp cry from the gates below. Soldiers rushed past, alert and tense, carrying word of approaching danger. Nobles and mercenaries who sought to exploit the scandal of the festival, the mark, and the bond. Mira's betrayal had been only a part of a larger plot, a conspiracy designed to destabilize Kalen's rule. "Ilara," Kalen said, placing a firm hand on her shoulder, "you will need to stand with me now. The bond we share will guide you, and together, we will face what comes." Ilara nodded, gripping the mark as though it were a lifeline. She had learned much from the forest, from the trials, and from Kalen himself. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was standing despite it. And she would stand. The enemy arrived at the courtyard with a force that seemed overwhelming, yet Kalen moved with confidence, his presence radiating authority. Ilara felt the bond thrum with energy, lending her clarity and calm. She moved beside him, not as a follower, but as a partner. Every instinct she had honed in the forest now guided her steps, every emotion linked to Kalen's focus, sharpening her senses. The battle began with swift precision. Kalen's power was unmatched, but Ilara found herself anticipating movements, dodging attacks, and offering support that was uncanny even to her own mind. The bond allowed them to move as one, an unspoken synchronization that turned fear into strategy and chaos into control. When the dust settled, the intruders were driven back, retreating into the city below. Ilara's chest heaved with exertion, but there was no panic, only a sense of triumph, of having faced danger and stood her ground. Kalen looked at her, and for a moment, the fierce, untouchable king seemed human. "You have done well," he said, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "More than anyone could have expected. The bond is strong now, tempered by courage and trust. You are no longer merely bound. You are part of it, part of me, part of what must endure." Ilara's gaze dropped to her wrist, the mark glowing softly. She realized then that the fear she had carried since the slap, since the marking, had transformed. It had become strength, connection, understanding. Kalen stepped closer, the space between them charged with a tension neither fear nor hesitation could define. "Ilara," he whispered, "this bond is not just destiny, it is choice, it is courage, it is trust, and it is more than I can fully name." Her breath caught, her pulse quickening. I feel it," she admitted, voice trembling slightly. "The bond. It is frightening, and it is overwhelming, but I want to understand it. I want to face it. With you." A silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken truths and the weight of centuries. Then Kalen reached out, his hand brushing hers, not in command, but in connection. The mark pulsed, luminous and steady, as if affirming her words, her choice, and the path they would walk together. "You have chosen well," he said softly. "The bond is stronger because you have embraced it. And now we must face the future, together as equals, not just in power, but in spirit." Ilara looked into his eyes and saw not just the king, not just the legend, but the man. The lonely, burdened, and powerful man who had carried centuries of pain. She felt her own heart align with his, in rhythm, in pulse, in unspoken promise. The days that followed were not easy. Political intrigue, lingering enemies, and the weight of the kingdom's expectations pressed down on them. But each challenge they faced together strengthened the bond. Ilara learned to trust her instincts, guided by the mark and the shared heartbeat of destiny. Kalen learned to share his burdens, to open parts of himself he had hidden for centuries. Mira, confronted with the consequences of her betrayal, sought forgiveness. Ilara met her with cautious compassion, acknowledging the manipulation that had led to the public humiliation, but also asserting the lessons she had learned. Courage, trust, and the strength to face destiny, even when it hurt. And then came the night of the first full moon since her marking. The castle grounds were silent, the world outside holding its breath. Kalen led Ilara to the cliff's edge, where the wind whipped around them, and the ocean below raged like a living thing. "You have faced trials, danger, and fear," Kalen said, "but the bond is not complete until you understand the full measure of choice. To embrace destiny is not to surrender. It is to rise, to accept the connection, and to claim your own strength." Ilara felt the mark pulse, steady and warm, linking her heart to his. She stepped closer, letting go of doubt, letting go of fear, and allowing herself to feel the pull of destiny as it coursed through her veins. I accept it," she said, her voice firm. "I accept the bond, not because it is forced, but because I choose to stand with you. Together." Kalen's eyes glowed brighter, the golden light reflecting the surge of power and connection between them. "Then it is complete," he said. "The bond is no longer a tether. It is a strength, a promise, a truth shared. You are no longer alone, and neither am I." The wind around them seemed to respond, carrying whispers of approval, of destiny fulfilled, and of the courage it had taken to reach this moment. Wolves howled in the distance, a song of the wild echoing the heartbeat of the bond. Ilara looked at Kalen, seeing not just a king, not just a Lycan, but a partner, an equal, a being who had been burdened by centuries of isolation and now shared connection, courage, and trust with her. She felt a sense of belonging unlike anything she had known, a warmth that rose from heart to heart, tethering them in a bond that was not just magic, but shared choice and understanding. Kalen extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the pulse of the mark synchronize with her own heartbeat. In that instant, all fear, all doubt, all past pain seemed to fall away. They stood together, not as predator and prey, nor as king and subject, but as equals bound by courage, trust, and the unspoken promise of shared destiny. The first rays of sun touched the cliffs, the castle, and the ocean below, casting gold across the stone and waves. Ilara and Kalen stood side by side, the wind wrapping around them like a cloak, the world stretching before them full of challenges, intrigue, and unknown paths. Yet they faced it together, the bond between them luminous, unbreakable, and alive. And in that moment, Ilara understood fully what it meant to be marked, what it meant to face destiny, and what it meant to rise beyond fear. The trials, the betrayal, the public humiliation, and the bond. They were all part of a story that had led her to this single, irrevocable truth. She would face the world with Kalen, the feared Lycan king, at her side. The castle, the kingdom, and the forest beyond waited for them, filled with mysteries, shadows, and the promise of challenges yet to come. But Ilara's heart was steady, her courage unwavering, and the bond, a pulse shared, a destiny embraced, was a light that would guide them through the darkness. Above the cliffs, the first full sun rose, spilling gold over the waves, the forests, and the stone towers. Two figures stood at the edge of the world, united by choice, by courage, and by the unbreakable bond of fate. And as the wind carried the whispers of destiny across the land, one truth remained clear. They were no longer merely bound, they were unstoppable together.